From awaytogarden.com and robinhoodradio.com, this is A Way to Garden with Margaret Roach, your weekly invitation to dig in and grow.
I built my old-style wooden raised beds for vegetables about 30 years ago, and they've served me well. Lately on social media, I love seeing younger generation gardeners embracing raised beds too, but using creative designs and even doing so in smaller spaces than mine, like today's guest, Kevin Espíritu of the Epic Gardening podcast. Kevin's new book, Urban Gardening, includes many raised bed construction styles to consider and his tips for success in growing in them. More in a moment, but first this message.
Underwriting support from Timber Press, your go-to resource for books in gardening and nature. Whether you're a new gardener, a professional at the top of your field, or a reader interested in the wonders of the natural world, their books are there to help you grow. timberpress.com.
The garden of today's guest, Kevin Espíritu of Epic Gardening, couldn't be much more different from mine. He's in San Diego Zone 10B. I'm rural New York Zone 5B. Most of his garden is in raised beds and other containers, and mine's mostly in the ground. But we have lots in common too, and I'm so glad he's here today to talk about successful above-ground growing methods and more. Hey, Kevin, how are you?
Hey, Margaret, I'm really good. How are you doing?
Okay. So we should tell people that we're visiting each other's shows this week, and we'll have links in the transcript of the show on awaytogarden.com and on social media and stuff to our conversations back and forth. So people who aren't regular subscribers to your Epic Gardening podcast can find out about it from my transcripts and so forth. And that we're giving away each other's books because we both have new books out. Yay for us.
Yeah. Awesome little cross-pollination we got going
There
on.
you go. Across 3,000 miles. That's pretty fierce insect that goes and pollinates that far away.
It's a digital insect.
Yes, exactly. So before we started talking raised beds, something I haven't confessed to you when we've spoken, Kevin, that the word epic is one that has special significance to me.
Oh, no way. I didn't know that.
It does. So it's sort of a little funny. When I'm kind of old friends call me type AAA. They say, Margaret, you're not type A, you're type AAA. So I get a little obsessive sometimes, and I overdo it, and I've got like 100 things going on at once, and I'm a little perfectionistic sometimes. And so one of the things I say to myself to calm myself down or stop that is I say, don't be epic, Margaret. Don't be epic. Don't always be epic. So it's a funny word for me, yet
That's interesting.
You know what I mean? Because like sometimes like perfect is the enemy of the good or something, or epic. But your epic is not that at all. It's like super positive and supportive and welcoming. So that's kind of interesting for me, that word, you know?
Yeah, that's so funny. Yeah, I think of epic, I guess, in just a different way. But I can see that. I wouldn't call myself type AAA, but I certainly have those personality traits, and I have to remind myself to calm down a little bit sometimes.
Yeah. But can you give us a little sort of 411 on yourself and your garden and sort of the range of your growing spaces and your season? You know, just paint us a picture of
yeah,
your
sure.
place. Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I didn't really grow up as a gardener. I definitely grew up as a kid who was into nature, but growing up in suburban San Diego, you find yourself skateboarding or surfing, and just wasn't really into the world of plants until later in life after I graduated college. So the first time I would say gardened in any significant way would have been when I was 21 or 22, and I did it with my brother. We just went to the nursery, and I think he got basil in pots. I know he got basil in pots because I remember he had these giant basil bushes throughout the whole summer that I was very jealous of, because what I decided to grow was cucumbers in a hydroponic system because I was in a townhouse, and that's been the story of my gardening life is always being space constrained. And so I thought, I don't have any light. I might as well go the hydroponic route and grow my cucumbers under lights. But that's a tall task to take on for a first-time gardener. And they didn't turn out that well. And by not that well, I mean they set fruit, but the fruit, I took this very positive and enthusiastic bite out of the cucumbers and just immediately spit it out because it was disgusting.
Yeah.
But, that's the name of the game when you're beginning. And since then, I was fortunate enough about 6 months after that to mentor under Mel Bartholomew of Square Foot Gardening, which kind of set me off.
Wow. That's amazing.
It was a really cool opportunity. I was actually just doing web design at the time, and he needed help with his website, and it just sort of went down this fortuitous path, which was really cool. And since then, I've basically been living in urban spaces since then. So condos, townhouses, small homes. The biggest place I've grown in is the one I'm in right now, which I think for you would be one segment of your garden. So I'm growing in a front yard, maybe 15 or 20 feet by 40 feet ish,
Yeah.
and maybe 150 square feet of growing space because I'm growing in raised beds, like you mentioned. So
Yeah.
that's my primary growing space.
Yeah, Mel Bartholomew, a pretty good mentor to have. And you and I have, besides, and I admire his work, and it was important to me as I was learning to garden also years ago. And we have another sort of guru, mentor-y kind of person who's even older than I am, Ruth Stout. We both love Ruth Stout and her sort of no-work gardening crazy stuff, right?
Yeah, I love Ruth Stout. I think, to me, Mel and her have a similar philosophy or ethos where they're stripping it down. Instead of adding more complexity, they're taking it away, which is something I really enjoy.
Yeah, like why lift an extra finger if you don't have to, and you can do a productive task rather than just an obsessive task. And there goes Margaret, going to be epic again.
Yeah, you're getting too epic. Yeah, we need to. Maybe I'll rename my whole company Anti-Epic Gardening.
No, and I don't mean to be offensive at all. It's just it's a funny word for me because it was how I had to talk myself off the ledge for a number of years.
Totally.
But I love your version of epic is epic. So I love that your book Urban Gardening, which is just out this growing season, it showcases raised beds in all their variations. So I have the traditional. You get in the old days I got 2x12 lumber of some kind of rot-proof lumber, and I put, I guess, what you would call dead men, like sort of wooden stakes into the ground that helped bolster so that the long beds didn't bow out in the middle. Mine are like 4 or 5 feet wide by 20 feet long. Supports and so forth and some reinforcement. But it's just basically boxes on the ground, right? Mm-hmm. But you have a lot more going on in the book, a lot of ideas that kind of caught my eye.
Yeah, I wanted to. First of all, that would take up my whole growing space, right? Just one of your beds would take up everything. So
no.
I had to rethink and just try to keep the perspective of, for me, a lot of the readers that I have are beginning gardeners who are very similar to me, where the most space they have is potentially a somewhat large backyard. And,
yes.
And so the plans in the book are they're almost like the blueprint of a plan. So, things where you're taking a 2x6 piece of lumber and you're sliding it into some pre-made planter blocks, and you can kind of mix and match and do almost like a Lego or an erector set style garden that, for me as a renter, it's amazing because then when I need to leave, I can just deconstruct that without even having to unscrew anything, and off I go. Or using these very lightweight corrugated metal beds, growing in grow bags, all these different methods that it does the same thing as your raised beds. It's just a way that's a little bit more palatable for someone with either smaller space or they don't know if they're going to be there for too long.
Well, and I loved, even you show cinder blocks. It's like, hey, it's okay, folks. Like, make a raised bed. And some people have used straw bales in the past in a more rural environment where that's an available material, to either enclose a space or, in fact, you could even grow in the bales. But, these above-the-ground ways of growing. And I love that yours are kind of, you can take it with you if you move, as you say, and that is the case for a lot of people, especially younger gardeners. And it's so important to not make gardening seem irrelevant and too much for people who may not be in a permanent home yet, And so I worry about that, being an older gardener in an established place where I've been for decades. I don't want to look irrelevant. You know what I mean? I want people to think, hey, I could just do that little tiny thing she's got over there, and that would be enough,
Right. I've thought about the same thing because I have plans to move to a scenario closer to yours where I am in a more permanent space.
Epic? Are you going to go epic?
I can get truly epic with my space. And I do have that fear of, once you see someone's garden that's been established for 30 plus years, you look at it and you get that. You would get the same effect if you looked at a bodybuilder as you were just trying to go to the gym. You're like, okay, what's the point of even trying, right? And so, always trying to keep it at that beginner layman's level and make it seem possible, I think, is something I really try to focus on.
Yeah. I loved some of the raised beds you had. Like, for instance, if I just wanted one year, even at my place, if I wanted to just like try something new, a crop that I don't have room for right now or that I'm not growing, I mean, I could do with those sort of corner kits, those preformed, I don't know what you call them, like where you just
the planter block ones.
Planter block. Is that what you said, planter or planner?
I think they're called planter blocks. I found them at Home Depot, actually.
Yeah, they were great, and you just kind of slide the wood in, and, you can make it any size I guess you want, and it was so smart. So it was kind of like, hey, on the fly, if this year I decided I'm going to grow a lot of fill in the blank, I don't have to make a permanent decision, right?
Yeah, the beauty of those ones, too, is if you're in a space that has a very irregular area that you're able to garden in, well, you can just take the 2x6 pieces of lumber and cut them to whatever size you want. You can make L's or U's or whatever shape you want. You can even do a tiered stair-step garden and stack them on top of each other and make use of available light if perhaps that's something that's unique to your growing space. So something like that, I think, is so cool because it just allows someone to understand the theory of it and then just customize it completely to their space.
And I love the corrugated metal ones you referred to briefly a minute ago, and I know you've helped that Australian company like find a market here in America, which is great because those are they look great, and they're sort of like a cross between a container, like a beautiful patio pot, and a raised bed because they're this corrugated. I think they have. They're painted. They have, they come in different colors and stuff too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're a powder coated galvanized steel. So I've had those for 4 years now, I think, and they look the exact same as when they came out of the box. And I have nothing against wood, and I love wood raised beds, but they're not going to look that good for that long. You're still going to get some fading, and even if you get a rot proof one, that will eventually start to break down. It's an organic material. So I'm a big fan of those. They're really lightweight, and you can customize those into different shapes as well, which obviously you're seeing a theme here with my level of customization that I like in a garden.
Yes. Now, I can't even remember if like 30 years ago I put underlayment, some type of a weed barrier, fabric-y kind of thing in the bottom of my beds. I have no idea. But you do, right? Before you fill a bed, whatever it's made out of, constructed out of, you use weed block or some kind of fabric?
Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. So the yard, when I moved into my yard, it was just bare soil, just open dirt, and it really didn't have any weed pressure, fortunately. And so the beds that I put in are 15 inches tall, and so when I'm putting in soil into those beds, my thought was that would just smother what already didn't seem to be there, and that's proven to be true. But, if you have a digging pest, then you could throw some hardware cloth on the bottom. And certainly if you're putting a raised bed, like many readers on a concrete, if they don't even have growing space, open soil, then it might be a good idea to throw some landscape fabric down to protect the concrete and kind of pull it up the insides of the bed.
Right. Okay. And so yours are, did you say 13 or 15 deep? How deep?
Mine are 15 deep, and I'm about to get some that are 30 inches deep too. So as a 6'4" gardener, it's really nice to have something that tall.
6'4"? Oh,
yeah.
I didn't realize you were that tall. You see, on Instagram and stuff, I can't tell. There's no perspective. You know what I mean? And usually you're leaning into the camera and stuff when you're doing a video.
Yeah. I think people get surprised when they realize I'm that tall.
So soil mix. And I say soil a little bit in quotes because it's not just fill like someone would use in a construction site or something. It's what do you put in your beds when you're starting a new bed?
Yeah, I've tested a lot of different things, and actually, this is one of the biggest mistakes I ever made when I first moved into this space, which would have been about 3 years ago now. I would have only been 2 to 3 years into my gardening life, I guess you could say. So I made a really classic mistake where I ordered a couple cubic yards of a screen topsoil compost mixture.
Yeah.
But I just did it a bit too blind, and the mixture was not as advertised, and it was exceptionally heavy in clay and very compacted. And so I made a very big mistake there and had to dig it out and re-amend it and do all this nonsense. And so what I like to do now, I kind of follow the advice actually of Joe Lample, who we both know.
Oh, Joe. We love Joe.
Yeah, he's a great guy, and he's got a great recipe where he tries to do about 50% topsoil, 25% compost, and 25% locally available organic matter, whatever's good and close to you. For him, that's leaf mold or autumn leaves.
Yes.
For me, that's not, because I don't have that.
Oh,
but I could do things like grass clippings, or I could get a little bit more local compost from my local municipality, just things like that, and try to balance it out that way.
Yeah. No, I think that's the number one quote mistake, that is made is, and this is even true. You mentioned grow bags before, and I'm a lover of grow bags. If people don't know what they are, I think they were originally created for the nursery industry, especially tree and shrub growers, which, they to grow above ground, but not in plastic pots, and they're more easily moved and so forth. And they're kind of made of recycled material, I think, maybe like old soda bottles or something.
I think so. Yeah. From what I recall, I think they might be made out of some sort of spun plastic or sometimes felt.
Yeah, and they feel felty. That's a good word for it. And some of them have handles on the side. So I ordered a bunch years ago. Big. I mean, they're probably 18. The ones I have are probably 18 inches across or something, and at least as deep. And they look like a big tote, a big gray tote or something. And the thing is, I use half of them for growing things in, and the other half, because I bought a dozen, I use as when I'm around weeding. As opposed to bringing a wheelbarrow with me around the yard all the time. Sometimes I just drag one of those around and, fill it with debris as I'm working during the day. Have a little handful of weeds over here.
Smart, yeah.
You know what I mean? I use it as like a tote. And it's great. So, and they're not expensive. And, and they don't take a lot of space to store because obviously they're fabric. They fold flat. So I love those. But whether you're growing in those, a lot of people are like, they get this clean fill, topsoil, stuff that's advertised and it's not as advertised. Or they dig it up out of the ground and put it in there. And it's like the plants don't thrive in that. It's too heavy and clay, as you said.
Yeah. And the crazy part was the mistake that I made. I bought a mix that was advertised as 60-40 topsoil compost. And it just... clearly was not. There was just no way that was true. And when you buy 3 cubic yards and it gets dumped on your driveway, you're not returning it once you find that out. That's just the end of the equation. So definitely would say if I could give any beginner gardener the number one piece of advice would be to make sure you research and get the soil correct, because besides light, that's the number 2 thing for a plant. Yeah. So if it's not right, then every other problem is going to stem from that.
Yeah. I was very interested in some of the tips that I've gotten from you, besides coming from the book, from Urban Gardening. I also find them on your Epic Gardening Instagram account. And I'm always, it's so interesting when I see you, you'll just put out a tip like it's, nothing special, but I know it is a special, really insightful tip. For instance, how you do greens. You do them sort of intensively, and maybe because you have the Mel Bartholomew connection, you sort of do a lot of things. Kind of, you have a limited space, but you plant it pretty ambitiously, and then you thin in unusual ways, like the way you do your greens and your beans. Tell us a little bit about those.
Sure. Yeah, I think again, it is a function of just having such little space where even a single raised bed that I have, and I think I have maybe 15 now of various sizes, but I kind of pretend as if the raised bed is an entire plot. Like, what if that's the only plot I had? And then I look at it almost as if it's a bird's eye view of a larger farm, if that makes any sense.
Yes, it does.
And so then what I do is I say, okay, well, if that's the case, there's no way you would space things the way that they're recommended, because that would be an incredibly wasteful use of space. Yeah, you might have to spend a little extra time doing some more thinning out or making sure that plants are getting enough airflow, all that good stuff. But for me, especially with that greens tip that you're talking about, I've got a 4 foot by 4 foot bed, and I was doing roughly 1 per square foot, going back to the Mel Bartholomew method of different types of greens and brassicas. So your kales and your collards, etc. But anytime I'm starting a seed, I'm usually throwing 2 or 3 into that same hole just to guarantee germination.
Right.
And oftentimes more than one comes up, which is great and normal. And then what people will do is they'll thin that once they see the one that looks most viable. What I decided is, okay, well, I don't think I have to thin it as soon as I know which one is the most viable. I think I could just wait maybe 2 extra weeks, and the ones that I would have thinned will become a baby green.
Dinner.
Yeah, exactly. And I cut them at that point,
yeah.
Which that won't impede the growth of the one that I want to grow to maturity, right? But when I do that, out of 16 plants, you cut off 2-3 thinnings per each plant. That's
right.
like pounds and pounds of greens that you wouldn't have had otherwise.
Right, and you didn't even know you had space for if you spaced it according to the formal directions, but it was
Exactly.
like extra. Do you know? Did you probably you weren't gardening at the time that one of the other formative books for me, and it's a Californian though, Northern Californian from up by the peninsula south of San Francisco, John Jevons.
I know his name. Yeah, I just haven't read the book though.
So his and I'm going to blank on the name of the book, but it's like How to Grow More Vegetables or something like that. But he follows the French biointensive method, and it's raising up the soil, and that's, by the way, another form of raised bed which you show in your book Urban Gardening, which is you could just raise up the soil in a row in the ground and put like planks to walk, pieces of wood to walk on in between the rows, these mounds that you made, kind of. But he planted that way and very intensively, using every square inch, and in a little bit of a way you remind me of him too. He's a real guru. He's great. Your beans, you also, I plant a row of beans down the side of, or part of the side of one of my 20-foot beds, but you would do bush beans differently.
Yeah, so I don't really have the ability to do a long row, or if I did, let's say my average bed is about 3 foot by 4 foot, so I could do maybe 2-ish rows down 4 feet or something like that.
Yeah.
Instead of doing that, I went actually probably too intensive this time around, but it still worked. And I went 9 per square foot, which is pretty, that's pretty extreme. But the thesis there was, am I going to get as much yield on a per plant basis? Definitely not, because they will crowd each other a little bit. And I might have some loss just due to competition. But in general, if you just look at the bed as a single piece of output, then I got way more beans from the bed than I would have if I just did the rows, right? So the bed output was higher, even though the per plant output was lower.
Right. And I think that's an interesting way to think. And even people as myself, where I have more space, why aren't I using the space I'm cultivating and maybe putting a cover crop in a bed that I don't need? Like, why am I spacing everything out? Do you know what I mean? Like too much a little bit, and having to like weed more space than I need. Like I could probably do a block of beans like what you're talking about, get what I need, and not have to keep that whole 20-foot area weeded. So it's an interesting, different way to look at spacing. In the last few minutes, I one of the things that I love, well, there were so many things I loved in the book. One was in the balcony garden section, and I saw these pictures of hanging baskets, like of parsley and stuff, and I thought, Margaret, why don't you use hanging baskets more? Like, talk about creating more growing space, right? Is up above.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I have So I have a side yard that gets maybe half day's worth of sun, but the area of my side yard that gets the most sun is, or at least the sun that in the earliest part of the day, right, is the balcony or the little hanging area.
Right.
So what I decided to do then was throw some hanging baskets there, and then I put peas in, and I just let them fall instead of climb.
Cool, yeah.
Because then the young seedling is going to get sun early, and it's gonna grow, and then it's gonna trail. And so I got a lot of peas out just doing that, which it definitely looks kind of weird, but it was the only way I could make use of that in an edibles way.
Yeah, and the other thing that I loved was that you had a sidebar, kind of a box in the book early toward the front, where you talk about this essential skill of observation. So just in closing, tell us what that means to you and why you wrote that little sidebar there.
Right. Yeah. So I think we also talked about this on our podcast week that you came on my show, and it's so important, right? And I think really it's not just a gardening skill. It really just is a life skill, kind of the mentality of the observer. And as soon as you see what's going on, then you can understand how to potentially fix it, instead of going out into the garden and seeing a dead tomato and just saying, oh, my tomato's dying, what's going on? And maybe Googling that problem. I mean, of course that's going to help, but to understand and look very deeply at, okay, well, how is it dying? In what way is the plant suffering? Right. And then if you get that, then you can say, okay, little black spots on the lower leaves of my tomato plant. You Google that, and then it says, okay, might be Septoria leaf spot. And then you say, okay, now I understand. And then maybe you even read about that disease, and you say, okay, now I know even how that disease presents. And it goes back to even what you were saying on my show about identifying the different types of of pests by their dentition and how they chew.
Right, animal pests who are eating something. Who is it? Right.
It's getting that deep about it, because as soon as you can start to observe more, then you can solve your own gardening problems for yourself instead of always looking to an outside source.
Yeah. So, and I would vote for that I think the two skills of great gardeners are what you just said, observation, slowing down, looking carefully, watching things as they evolve, taking note, and also, of course, patience.
Yeah. I struggle with that one.
So, Kevin, I'm so happy to speak to you. We're going to have, as we said at the beginning, with the transcript of the show and on yours as well, we're going to mention to people how they can enter to win the books and urban gardening, and you're going to give away a way to garden. So I'm so glad to meet you, and I hope this will just be the first of many conversations where we can learn from each other. Thank you.
Yeah, me too, Margaret. Thank you so much.
Underwriting support from Timber Press, your go-to resource for books in gardening and nature. Whether you're a new gardener, a professional at the top of your field, or a reader interested in the wonders of the natural world, their books are there to help you grow. timberpress.com.
Now, don't miss an episode. You can subscribe free to the podcast version on Stitcher or iTunes or Spotify. And you can find me anytime at awaytogarden.com or at Facebook or Instagram as @awaytogarden. And happy gardening meantime.
A Way to Garden with Margaret Roach is a joint production of awaytogarden.com and the smallest NPR station in the nation, Robin Hood Radio.